And then we also heard Absalom, Absalom, and Thunderclaps. We heard Hugo Wheel and Look Away. And before the Rudies, we heard from Cali Creek Dub Collective. Okay, now before I launch into the interview with my guest, let me get a little bit of background for you guys for the uninitiated. The very first technology that made sound recordings available to the general public was not on a flat disc, it was on a cylinder. It was on a large tube of a sort of brown or black wax. It was roughly about maybe 3.5 inches long, probably about 2.5 inches in diameter. It spun on a kind of a metal pipe called a mandrel. And the beauty of these machines is, if they were equipped properly, you could not only play back music on it, but you could also record on it. There was something called a reproducer that played the music back, and then when you wanted to make your own music or record your voice or something like that, there was something on there called the cutter stylus. This was a stylus that usually was activated by a diaphragm. Some were made of mica, some were made of glass. Let me give you an example of what a cylinder sounds like. Had a limited frequency range, roughly about 2K. It didn't go much more than 2 kilohertz to 3 kilohertz, if that. The first cylinders came out in 1899, and they were primarily used in arcades, coin slot machines and so on. Then, in about 1895, the first commercial cylinders came out, and that was the dominant technology until about 1908, which is when the first flat discs became available to the general public. And from then on, the cylinder and the flat disc were competing technologies, and then the flat disc won out, and the cylinder just declined in popularity until they'd stopped being made altogether by the end of the 20s. But there is a new and fairly recently, over the last several years, revived interest in this 100-plus-year-old technology. They Might Be Giants did a very famous series of cylinder recordings at the end of the 90s. There have also been a couple of bands recently have come out under the steampunk fashion genres that have made cylinders. There are two actual companies, one in England and one over here, that have reproduced cylinder recordings from the time period 1900 to 1920. And we also have artists that are incorporating cylinder technology and mixing it in with modern music to create a kind of ethereal, kind of a dream-like quality, if you will. The cylinder technology, although primitive, creates a certain aura, a certain sound that's not quite like any other. And we have a person here in Lexington who is heavily involved in that technology and doing wonderful things for that. His name is Christopher David Heinmiller. We have him right here in the studio right now. Say something, Chris, so I can...
Hello, everybody. It's good to be here.
Hang on just a second. Try that again.
Hello, everybody. It's good to be here.
No wonder, Chris. I have you on the wrong microphone. Take 3.
Hello, everyone. It's good to be here tonight.
All right, we got you now. By the way, in all the prep for this, I hadn't think to ask you, do you prefer to be called Chris or Christopher?
Either one's fine. It doesn't matter.
Cool. I know that you had a live band before this that was kind of like a progressive jazz rock.
Yeah, it's actually still the same band.
Right.
Everything I do is released under Desert Sleep because I like to keep things under just one name to keep it more simple.
Oh yeah.
And basically, it's just an evolving project. That's what I call it.
Well, tell me about what you're doing now and how you're incorporating this 100-year-old cylinder technology in what you're doing recently.
Well, what I'm trying to do now, there's been many artists who have recorded entire albums just straight on cylinder. What I'm wanting to do is combine cylinder recording with digital recording on the same album. The two technologies a century apart. That's what fascinates me most, and that's what I did with my latest album that came out May of last year, the Edisonic Spiritual Tapestry device. It has sort of a time travel backstory, and I accomplished this by combining modern digital recording via Ableton with straight up acoustic recording on my 1901 Edison Standard.
Yeah, I had actually made a mistake when I described that. It wasn't a 1910 machine; it was a 1901
Yeah,
machine.
it's very early. It's from around 1901. It's when the cases first went from the square box to the more curved shape.
Right.
And it's got a green oak color to it.
Right, and at that time your machine came out, that was brand new technology. It had only been out 5 years. I mean,
Yeah,
available to the public.
Yeah.
And there was and the reason I make the distinction, as hair splitting as it may be, between 1901 and 1910, because I understand that in the 10 years between the two extremes, there were additional refinements made to the recording technology to try and make it louder, to try and improve the frequency range. But generally, it's the same machine.
And actually, the cylinders, they continued up until even the 60s. It was common to see them in use in the offices. They were still being used in office settings for the Ediphone and the Dictaphone brands.
Yes. I remember that. I remember seeing those used like that. You could still get that, and it was still possible. You'd have a shaver, which you would take the surface off, and that way you would have a clean cylinder ready to reuse.
Yes.
Now, let's go ahead and break right here, and I want to go ahead and play something from what you've got here. It's a short piece, and we can either go after that or go to the next one. This is Sunset Garden from Edisonic Volume 1. Christopher David Heinmiller on WRFL.
March the 7th, 1914.
Night Garden, and preceding that, Sunset Garden from Christopher David Heinmiller. And once again, these are pieces that are incorporating 100-year-old Edison cylinder recording technology. And tell me more about that, sort of.
Well, basically, first the background of these pieces, like artistically, these were inspired by sort of the Impressionist composers from late 19th century, early 20th century. I was trying to go for this sort of Edwardian French Impressionist sound, like Lily Boulanger, Ravel, and there's a bit of Scriabin in there, a bit of Russian influence. But those are basically sort of French art songs, but I sing them in my own kind of improvised language. But anyways, these were recorded on the 1901 Edison Standard with an original 1905 recorder. Basically just set the horn up, had the keyboard, and improvised vocals.
So everything was done all together.
Yes, on these two tracks, these were done in a live setting. Except on Night Garden, I had two backing tracks in the background with the percussion, but the keyboard, that was live.
Let me tell you about the level of difficulty involved in this, because what he has to record this with is a giant horn. I don't know if these were done with the giant horn that you have now, or did you have one that was improvised out of an oil-filled tube?
These were actually done on an original late 19th century recording horn that I borrowed from my friend Brian, he's like the head of the Antique Phonograph Society.
Right.
It's a fiberglass horn.
Right,
He
right.
let me use that, and that's what I used to record these.
Because I know that you had a bunch of improvised horns for those folks at home. Each Edison cylinder phonograph comes with usually a long, typical horn-shaped object that's hooked right up to either the reproducer or the cutter. For the reproducer for playing back, the cutter for processing. You have to be fairly loud in the tube in order to get a robust sound registered. And so what you've got is him sitting here, and he's like being as loud as he can down this recording tube while simultaneously playing keyboard. And he can't look down when he's doing this, or else his voice will be lost. He has to go direct. He has to keep his face up directly into the mic, and he has to give enough sound pressure generated to be able to register on the groove.
Yeah, and those each took about 3 takes each. Had to record it, it was messed up, shave the cylinder, do it 2 more times again.
Because the question that was on the tip of my head as I was about to pass was, which came first, the keyboard or the cylinder? Did you do the cylinder first and dub everything else on later? And then it's like everything was done here in real time, which is just fascinating to me, because I attended a sort of a get-together that you held where you'd had the Edison recorder set up. And oh, by the way, since you had the 1905 cutter technology on the 1901 player, things had technologically improved by then where they could actually have it louder than they did before.
Yeah.
I know they experimented with certain kinds of diaphragms, glass and mica, and try and see which would deliver the loudest.
There's a debate going on. I can't say for myself because I've never tried a glass diaphragm recorder from the 1890s. I've only used this micro recorder. But the debate is, it's easier to make louder recordings on the micro recorder from 1905, but a lot of purists, they say that the glass diaphragm in the old automatic recorders produces a more natural sound.
Right. And by the way, thank you for allowing me to record a song that's dear to my friends back in Richmond, Virginia. They had discovered the original melody that was lifted for the Star Spangled Banner. It turned out to be a drinking song, so he allowed me to graciously record that and honor them. And then I had heard the kind of almost kind of like a archaic halo effect that it treated on a live band, which you had recorded. I had an excerpt from that, which I had taken that day. I don't have it in front of me right now, and it's just a short piece. And it would have been it was part of a larger recording which I had messed up. I'm very sorry about that, because when you make any kind of recording, and this is true for cylinders as it is for vinyl in the mastering lab, the cutter head is cutting the groove, and it's taking all that material and it's just flinging it out to either side of the groove. And there was a term for that?
Yeah, you mean the swarf?
The swarf, yes. And that is a term that is still being used for cutting records today. And it's the waste material that gets cut out as the groove, that cut out and laid on the side as the groove of being made. And there's various ways of trying to clean that up so it doesn't get in the way of the stylist making a new cut. Some people use a brush, and then later on they came up with like a small vacuum attachment in order to get it out. So I'm standing there trying to be a do-gooder, trying to clear this swarf off with a brush, and all I'm ending up doing is slowing down the speed of the cylinder. So
Yeah.
I brought your band into chipmunk land when I did that, and I kind of knew that those blank was that a new manufactured cylinder that you
That
used?
cylinder was probably 111 years old at least. It was an original brown wax cylinder
Right.
that had been shaved.
Okay.
So that was about as authentic as you can get to, a 1890s recording.
I had written Vulcan Cylinders about a week ago and asked them. Vulcan Cylinders is the British company that is selling redone new cylinders of old recordings. And I asked Vulcan, because I'd seen it somewhere before, that they were still selling blanks. And so I asked them what their deal was for blanks, and they said, no, they didn't sell blanks anymore, but they gave me an address of somebody who did. And and you can get blanks, and there's a deal to ship to America, but
Yeah, Paul Morris. That's the gentleman who
that's the
does
guy.
that over in the UK.
That's the guy. I know there's one American guy who's also involved in this same thing. I haven't had the time to ask him yet, but let's go ahead and with more of this. We're going to go on to Mystic Chord and the Poetry at Ocean song. Did you have any kind of introduction or information?
These also continue the trend with the sort of impressionistic French art song inspired by Lily Boulanger, Debussy, Ravel. And but these combine digital recordings with the Edison technology.
Okay, here we go. Christopher David Heinmiller, Mystic Chord and Poetry Ocean song. You're listening to WRFL.
Moss-covered wall and glistening lake. She waits in the room of creation as a witness, love's witness, filling the great void of entitlement, progressing onward. The flow, the wave, the soul, the rhythm, true life, creativity. desert sleep. 1912. Heinmiller Phonograph crew. Midnight Ocean Song.
Christopher David Heinmiller on WRFL. That was the poetry/ocean song. And we also heard Mystic Chord. If you're just tuning in, Chris is involved with incorporating the 100-plus-year-old technology of the cylinder phonograph recorder, along with new sounds. And there's an interesting irony right here, because the machine that you've been doing all these things is spring-driven.
Yes.
And, I mean, in the past, I mean, they had problems with spring-driven machines where the speed wasn't constant, but you're not having any trouble with that.
No, my 113-year-old standard is actually more steady than the electric machine that I thought would be better than it. So I've kind of put the electric machine on hold.
I understand that. You had an Edison standard photograph, which you're using for all that stuff, and then you were hoping to work up an electric model to, try and get some constant speed, a machine that would do constant speed. So to that end, I think you got an original Edison electric motor.
Yeah, it's an Econowatt motor. I'd say it's from anywhere from the 20s to the 40s probably.
And were these used specifically four-cylinder machines?
This one would have came out of an earlier, smaller tabletop Ediphone machine, one that's like in a black case. And basically an Ediphone was an Edison cylinder phonograph, but you had different groove spacing.
Right.
Because they weren't made for entertainment. They were made for dictation, letters in the office. And you had a larger cylinder. And this was only for recording a voice and then shaving it.
Right.
And this is what this motor would have been in.
And the big irony was you're having more speed problems with this than you had with the spring machine.
Yeah.
I understand you're also doing creating your own films, doing film soundtracks, and sort of combining the two together to get a kind of ethereal, almost a seance effect, I'd say.
Yeah, basically what I'm doing is, I don't know if you've heard of this, in 1890s, the first ever sound experiment with film was called the Dixon Sound Experiment. And basically what they did was they had a cameraman filming, they had Edison phonograph with the horn, recording probably on a brown wax cylinder, and basically they recorded a man playing a little tune on violin, and then there's two guys dancing around in a circle. Mm-hmm. And basically they were trying to sync up the cylinder sound with the image, and I'm trying to bring that back. I'm trying to bring back the earliest film sound, and I've made one film so far, well actually two films, experiments with all the audio was recorded on cylinder and then synced up, and next month I'm starting a full project. It's going to be a 10 or 15 minute short film. All the audio is going to be recorded live on cylinder. The film is going to be shot silent, and all the audio is going to be recorded live on cylinder. We're going to have that big horn on set, but it's going to be just out of the frame. And the film is going to be called Midnight Mind, and it's going to be a really unique experience. Nothing like it since like the 1890s.
Because I understand that, like, prior to this, up till now, I mean, the recording horns that you were using were, everything from like a regular short horn to one of those an oil fill funnel. I think you started out with one made out of poster board.
Oh yeah, and they worked surprisingly well. They captured really nice bass frequencies, really nice highs. Actually, the clearest voice recording I ever got was out of the little funnel that was come from an auto parts store.
Right, but now you've got this giant monster horn that needs to be connected up with a rubber tube at the business end, and you got this stand for it, and it's just this most impressive looking thing because it's almost 4 feet long. It's got a 2-foot diameter bell, and it's just this exaggerated massive thing. It looks really impressive.
I know. I saw the thing hanging on Brian's ceiling for like a year, and I finally asked him, I said, I have to have that thing. Will you sell that to me? And he sold it to me, and I've just had the best time out of that. I mean, when you play back cylinders, you notice a huge increase in the in the low end of the cylinder. When you record with it, it picks up music from great distances. You don't have to be close to it if you're recording instruments. I mean, that's just the real deal. It was a concert horn made for projecting out to a bunch of people.
I understand that sometimes when you record stuff through the horn, it has a typically unique sound, which is that any instrument or anything loud is that happens to coincide with the resonant frequency of the horn will add a vibration, and so you'll get to, excuse me for saying this, but you'll get kind of a horny effect.
Yeah.
With and whereas certain things will just vibrate just right, and they'll add something to it. Like for example, I'll get recordings from the Gennett studio that was in Richmond, Indiana, in the teens and 20s, and they sort of just like let the horn just keep ringing out and adding stuff to it, no adornment. Whereas someone like Edison, what they would do, I've seen some pictures where they wrap tape around the horn to try and dampen it and not get it to resonate. Have you had any kind of like situation where you tried to like experiment with wrapping the horn or anything like that, or you just let it ring out?
Yeah, I haven't really done it. It doesn't bother me too much. And I mean, the neat thing about this bighorn too is that because of the material it's made out of, it kind of almost, even when you record with it, it sort of captures this almost tinny reverb sound that I like. It reminds me of like the antique equivalent of a spring reverb on a Fender amp. So it's kind of a neat effect. Natural spring reverb.
Black and brown wax cylinders. What's the difference? I'm curious because I've always wanted to know, what was used in either purpose and why.
Well, the brown wax ones were the earlier ones. Basically, that was the first technology. The way they used to record back then, they would actually do every recording live.
Yeah, I know.
Figured out a way to dub. Like a guy would go in there and record 100 times a day just for each recording. So everything you'd have back then is one of a kind. That's why people get so angry when you shave them down, because they're like, you're destroying history, But a lot of them are so moldy that you can't hear them most of the time.
There was a guy, a comedian, a comic singer named George W. Johnson, and he recorded the very first, some of the very first cylinders. He was famous for basically inventing the genre known as the laughing song, and he recorded each and every single cylinder.
I think thousands of times, if I'm not mistaken.
Because they didn't come out with molding until 1895 or later.
Yeah, the earliest way they had to copy these was called the tubing process, where you have two Edison phonographs directly across from each other, one with a reproducer, one with a recorder, attach a tube to the reproducer end, it plays back, and then you're basically dubbing the sound through the tube on the other phonograph with the recorder. And the sound wasn't very good, but it was what they came up with, and it was just good enough for them to sell at the time period.
Well, that was fascinating to me because I thought they didn't have that means of reproduction until like the mid-teens. You see these situations where you've got two horns stuck business end to business end at each other. And what Edison did as we got past World War II is he was starting to make the diamond disc, which was the first sight of semi-microgroove record, and then dubbing cylinders off the disc just to keep cylinders in production.
Yeah, those were the blue amberols. All the later blue amberols, those were sort of Edison's indestructible cylinder, plastic cylinder.
Right.
And before that, you had the Columbia Indestructibles and all that.
Right, because I know that they had that. There was a company Indestructible Record. And I know that they had cellulose, and some had a plaster base and things like that.
Yeah, the blue amberols have the plaster base in them, and a lot of the times you won't be able to fit them on your mandrel. You'll have to ream them.
Oh, yeah.
They sell reamers for that.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's a new reproduction device now called the Archaeophone, which, UC Santa Barbara has one, and those come with mandrels which are adjustable because they kind of figured that this stuff would shrink. Yeah. And they didn't want to risk wrecking it to try and play it. I mean, it's just better to find a mandrel that was like narrower for the size. Let's go on and get the rest of these pieces. This is the intro, digital, and the finale to Edisonic Volume 1, Christopher David Heinmiller. And let's see. Let's go skip ahead because I'm looking for a shorter track. Well, this one is good. Let's go ahead and skip ahead to the Edisonic Volume 2. looking at the clock here and trying to get as much variety as I can. And so let's see.
Yeah, and these are samples from this album. Should be out in the next couple months.
Oh, okay. This is Edisonic Volume 2, Blue Dream, Mist Dream, and then see if we can get Inner Jewel in there. But Blue Dream and Mist Dream, Edisonic Volume 2. I like how you have these names that sort of echo the trade names of 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Heinmiller Phonograph Company and Edisonic, this and that. But let's go ahead and get to Edisonic Volume 2 and get into this as much as we can. Christopher David Heinmiller on WRFL.
This portion of WRFL's programming is made possible in part by Mecca Live Studio and Gallery. Mecca offers classes including tribal-style belly dance, flamenco, hula hooping, poi spinning, and many more. Mecca is located at 948 Manchester Street and can be reached at 859-254-9790. WRFL thanks Mecca for supporting college radio.
It won't do. Heinmiller Phonograph Co., November 1914. Hello, little Johnny. Would you like to go to the local fish market with me? No, madam, it won't do. And why is that, little Johnny? Because, no, madam, it won't do. Why are you clapping in such a bizarre way, little Johnny? I'm not really sure. No, madam, it won't do. Would you like to hear me play this ancient wind whistle I found in the vortex of yore? Why, sure, little Johnny. Here goes. I call this one Wet Whistle Doghouse on the Tin Roof of Sully. Strijd bevindt zich tot een hapje voor het jaar. Ik wil voor een wipje daar en liefde uit. Thank you. Little Johnny, that was so fantastic. Shall we go to the fish market now? No, madam, that will not do. And why is that, little Johnny? Because I am from the 1922. Goodbye.
And that was a short little comedy piece by Christopher David Heinmiller, recorded on a 1901 Edison cylinder phonograph. And before that, we heard excerpts from Edisonic Volume 2, Blue Dream, and then followed by Miss Dream after a little ground announcement there.
And that album will be out this summer.
Okay, perfect, wonderful. Well, I mean, this is quite an unusual experience. I haven't seen this kind of like old plus new technology combined in such a unique way. It's really nice to hear, and I want to thank you for taking the time to come out. We're going to leave you with one more piece here, and we're just going to play this, and let me see if I can find it now.
And this is a piece from the self-titled album, actually. It's one of our jazzy tracks.
That's funny, because when I queued it up before, I don't think I have the right one. Hang on. That's funny. When I queued it up before, it said it was something like 7 minutes or something like that, but now it's saying it's only like a minute and 44. Hang on. Let me take the CD out and start it back up again and see if I can get the one. Let's see. Oh, there it is right there. I might have played this already. I can't remember. Maybe I did. Who cares, right? It's all good. Oh, by the way, I do the Great Grand Music Show, which is antique music of 100 years or more, and I'll be on Monday from 6 to 8. Great Grand Music will be on at 7. Uncle Foddy here bidding you night-night. You're listening to WRFL Lexington.